In about 10 minutes, I'm going to teach you the basic principles and the themes of HTML. This is not a tutorial where I go line by line through code, but rather a story about HTML as an idea. My name is Ben. I'm an entrepreneur and a self-taught software developer. There are thousands of coding tutorials on YouTube, but I want to make videos that get to the big idea. If that's something that interests you, especially if you're interested in making apps with Angular, you should check out the rest of this series and subscribe to the channel because I come out with new content every week. But like I said, I've got a story to tell you, so I'm going to take a seat and let's get started. When computers first became a thing, people really struggled to figure out how they wanted them to work. Should they have handles or cranks or cards or tapes or printers or keyboards or lights or screens? Eventually, we decided that we should interact with our computers by typing things on keyboards and viewing the results on screens. That might not even sound like it's worth mentioning, but it's not trivial at all. There was a time when we once used one machine to punch holes in cards, then we fed those cards to computers that would print the output onto paper. And then today, we have devices that only have screens and we provide input using touch and gestures.
It works like magic.
Some computers have no visual interface at all, and every interaction we have with them is completely verbal. Alexa, play a sound effect to make my point clear.
You have sound FX enabled. Do you want to open it?
My point is, the way we interact with computers has always been changing. But HTML was created during a time when typed, human-readable markup was a big deal. Furthermore, interaction with computers like the kind we have today was almost unfathomable. We were hindered by internet connection speeds, processor performance, and hardware. For that reason, it was okay that the content that we viewed on websites was largely static and unchanging. You can actually still see this today. Archive.org has a cache of websites going back as early as the mid-90s. We're going to take a look at this now just to show you the basics of how HTML works. This archive is called the Wayback Machine. The Wayback Machine goes back as far as late 1996. It can be pretty fun to look around at what a cutting-edge website looked like back then, but what we're going to do is use developer tools to look into how these early websites were coded. In Google Chrome, you can find developer tools up in the View menu. But in other browsers, such as Safari, you might have to change the preferences in order to make the developer menu available to you. This is the developer view in Safari. I'm going to click on the Elements section in order to view the HTML. Or in Chrome, you can find the Elements section up here. You'll find that as you hover over the HTML, the elements on the page will highlight to show you where the code matches up with the image. So here I am on Disney.com. You can see that the HTML is organized in a tree with different sections that can drop down. Each of those sections, as it relates to the tree or the relationship between those parts, is called a node. In HTML, we would call that section an element. When you click an element, the contents of that element cascade down. The text that describes that element is called a tag. So HTML is a document that organizes elements by describing them with tags, an opening tag and a closing tag. Within those tags are all of the children nodes. You'll notice these tags can be made a little bit fancier when you include some attributes for the tag. Like this table cell has 3 attributes: v-align, align, and width. In the mid-90s, that's all there was to it. It was just tags with attributes linked together, displayed on a page statically. Learn the conventions? Make yourself a website. Simple. I made my first website when I was in 7th grade in 1997. The reason I show you this is because showing you is the best way to convey an impression that everyone has about HTML, which is that HTML means learning the conventions. It means learning the rules. But at some point along the way, we had a realization. Why does TR mean row? Why does table mean table? These conventions, these rules, we made them. We make the HTML. It can mean whatever we want it to mean. These elements can mean anything. The way they look, the way they relate to each other, we can control it all. In short, we came out with an idea to control the entire look of the HTML. We called them styling sheets. And since they affect that cascading element tree, we call them cascading style sheets, or CSS. Now listen, CSS is a separate video. However, I can make a pretty strong point by just showing you 2 examples. Take a look at these 2 lists. These lists look almost exactly the same. Can you tell how they were coded? Well, if you're familiar with HTML, you probably recognize that there's an unordered list there, and that each of these is list items. We have a strong element, an italicized element, and a link. The second display is less predictable, however. To make a point, I've coded it in a way that's completely nonsensical. For example, I've used a heading instead of a list. Each item is a span. The first is a paragraph, the second is a sparg, and the third is a button. By the way, I am not at all saying that this is how modern coders write HTML. This is horrible practice. And I didn't just break conventions, I actually had to go out of my way to write CSS that would make the browser interpret this like the original example. But to that end, I make 3 instructional points. 1. CSS is a much more powerful visual tool than HTML. Number 2, you cannot escape the structure. Regardless of which tags I used, I must follow nesting rules. Tags have to be opened and closed, and a tag that opens inside of one tag must also be closed inside that tag. Number 3, HTML is not about what the site looks like. It's about the content. You can modify everything through the CSS. So how does all of this relate to modern web design? With improvements to internet connection speeds and innovations to devices and their capabilities, the internet is more interactive than ever. Developers use frameworks like Angular to make complex and expansive websites. What I'm about to share with you is true for Angular and React and Vue, but I'm going to use Angular code for my example. If you'd like to know more about the other tools and what sets them apart and why I think Angular is best for starting a new project, check out this video. Instead of elements, the building blocks of Angular are components. Components themselves are defined in part by using HTML, and sometimes they're just comprised of other components. I'm going to use an example from my own web app. This is from a project I'm currently working on. It's a wizard for building modular reports. There's a component called a widget select. It's comprised of a template select and a few thumbnail selects. Each thumbnail select is comprised of many thumbnails. Finally, a thumbnail is just a div with an image and a button. All of those components, the widget select, template select, thumbnail, I made them all up. They don't exist in HTML. They're elements that I invented for my website, but I can recycle them as if they are HTML tags. And I can differentiate between them by using attributes that are also defined by me. That's kind of a big deal. Modern HTML really is an abstraction. It's whatever you want it to be. You use a lot of the building blocks, the conventions, the rules, the basic elements that have been around for 30 years. But today, you can take those, put them together to make your own custom components and build your app out of those building blocks. So that's where we're going to be going from here. In the videos that follow this one, we're going to take a look at CSS, and then we're going to start using Angular to build components and eventually build ourselves an entire app. You should follow along with me, so subscribe to the channel, click the bell so you get notifications, and if you want more information, go ahead and follow me on Twitter at NeverBeenBetter or my blog at neverbeenbetter.com. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next week.